For many of us, the fantasy playoffs begin this week. Who better to join us than the great Michael Florio from NFL Network and NFL Fantasy, the two-time defending champ of the FLEX Superflex Leagues, all coming up on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the good folks from Circa, from Odds Are, and from Splash Sports. Jeff Erickson here. I am with Michael Florio from NFL Network. He does some work at RotoBaller as well, and even on SiriusXM Fantasy, where I'm as well. So, Michael, thank you for joining me today. How you doing?
Thank you for having me. I am doing well. I'm doing better than a lot of actual real-life NFL players are right now,
right?
Because it's going to be tough to field some lineups this week.
Absolutely. It's crazy. And the attrition rate at QB alone is just astounding this year. Not just this week, but all season long. We keep losing these premium quarterbacks. It's difficult to handle. It is playoff football time, fantasy playoff time for most leagues. Do you prefer a 6-team playoff or do you prefer a 4-team playoff?
I prefer 6, especially if you're in like a 12-team league or something like that.
Right.
I do think there's a huge advantage to being a top 2 seed, and you should get something for that. So I think the bye is the perfect way to kind of, you let those 2 other teams in, but you also are rewarding the top 2 teams for being the top 2 teams.
Exactly right. I am the same way, and I play mostly in 12 or bigger. So if I am in one 10-team league, and I think if it's 10, you go 4. I think that's fine. But I do like it this way. I wanted to turn to you for some expertise in doing well in fantasy playoff leagues. Obviously, the 2-time champ and Flex in the Superflex League. My first question is setting your lineups. Do you do anything differently? Do you pay attention to what your opponent is doing? Do you match his QB with your receiver or vice versa at all? Or do you just set your best lineup?
I don't pay any attention to my opponent when setting my starting lineup. I will pay attention to my opponent's lineup when putting in waiver claims. Because if they need a quarterback and I have a higher priority or more fab and I can prevent them from getting the best option, I will go that route. But so often we try to galaxy brain our lineups and stuff and be like, oh, well, he'll cancel this guy out. And then I've done that before and it hasn't worked out. So I'm a big believer in setting your best lineup. My biggest change in approach becomes in the regular season, I'll take some big swings. Like there's a lot of boomer bust players out there, and I won't shy away sometimes if I think it's a good matchup from starting them. But in the playoffs, obviously upside matters, but I think floor becomes so much more important because if you take a 0, that could end your season.
Absolutely. And I think that is a really good point. I think that is both the galaxy brain issue as well as the ceiling versus floor and setting your lineup there. It's one thing to add them to the roster. It's another thing to kind of take that chance. And I think if you're a big underdog, if you're playing the 1 seed and you're hamstrung, maybe you take a bigger swing in that flex spot or something of that nature and take a chance on the upside. I'm trying to think of spitball of an example here. It's, a player, sometimes it's a player returning from injury, like Achane coming back from injury or Jefferson coming back from injury this week. I think you're going to start Jefferson if you have him, if you made it this far. And if you got to the playoffs with Justin Jefferson on your roster, God bless you, because that's doing some work right there. But I think I would probably take that swing.
Noah Brown is like a good, like, if CJ Stroud plays, let's say Noah Brown, like we know he's so boom or bust, but I'm okay getting him in if CJ Stroud plays. But in a normal week in the playoffs, it would have to be like you said. I feel like I'm a big underdog or I don't love my other options. But if I have like a safer option, I'd probably would pivot away.
Yeah, we'll call that safer option, say Tyler Lockett, for example.
Yes,
it's like some like solid wide receiver 3 that you would normally start otherwise there. So I think that is great. Roster construction. Are you in any other pickup tips that you might have, whether it's like, more handcuffs on running backs, maybe multiple defenses, especially if you're only allowed to pick up players this week?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. You need to have your handcuff running back right now, if possible. Like, look at it like this. Ezekiel Elliott looks like he could be this year's potential league winner. there was who's the starter? Tai Chandler right now is in heavy demand if he's on the waiver wire. But every week, Zach Moss a couple weeks ago, every week the top waiver wire pickup is just whichever running back starter got hurt. So to prevent that, to prevent your opponent potentially from getting them from you or forcing you to use your top waiver priority or all your fab, go get your handcuff now. It costs so much less when they are just a backup. So, and buys are behind us now. Your bench spots are a lot more expendable because your starting lineup is set. It's not like in the middle of the season when 8 teams or something like that could be on bye and you really need that depth. So handcuff is one. And I think it's always smart to plan ahead. Like, I know we need to win this week, but if you are streaming quarterbacks or streaming defenses, like you said, don't be afraid to use one of your bench spots to get a week in front, because I was saying this last week with Matt Stafford. I know in some leagues he's not available, but in a lot of NFL.com leagues, he was available last week. And I was like, look, I know he has a really tough matchup this week against the Ravens on the road. You're probably not in a position where you want to start him. And that was wrong because he balled out. But I was like, he gets the Commanders next week. Like, get out in front of it and get him on your roster now. I have the Green Bay Packers on every single one of my teams where I have a bye, because they get the Carolina Panthers next week. So I think, and I added them going into week 14, knowing that I had the bye clinched and I wouldn't have to worry about a defense until week 17. I think it's always smart to, if you're streaming, to try to get a week out in front, even though maybe you get eliminated this week, but I don't play for that. I think I'm going to be there next week, so I want to be as prepared and as ready as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can do it before it becomes expensive, all the more reason. Absolutely. I agree 100% on that. Of course, big contests like the NFFC, we can't pick up anybody right now, but that you should know that last week. You should have known it 2 weeks ago, right? You know, of course, know your league rules is always the most important. Like, I think that's the starting step of any league when you're at the draft table, you name it. Speaking of, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I have a league just like that where you can't make pickups through the playoffs. So I am rostering 2 kickers and I am rostering like multiple tight ends and quarterbacks. You see all the injuries this year just in case.
Yeah. I know there's at least one NFFC playoff team that has the dreaded combo of Herbert and Stroud. And you're just like, and no recourse. That's just the worst. You're just like, knock on wood. Come on, Stroud. You're fine. You can do this. It's tough. Speaking of knowing your rules in advance and things of that nature, do you draft for the playoffs at all? Do you like look ahead, like when you're at the draft table, okay, weeks 15, 16, and 17? Do you look at that at all, or is this how do you handle that?
I look at that 0% when I'm
Same.
drafting, and some people like to. My thing is always and Jeff, you could speak on this. It is so hard to predict stuff on a week-to-week basis. We're going to try to plan 4 months in advance. Like, to me, I think you're overthinking it. And examples are like, coming into the year, we would have thought, okay, you can run on the Texans. They're a tougher defense to throw on. It's been the exact opposite this year. There's so many offenses that look completely different. Like, hey, the Chargers play the Raiders this week. That might have looked like a great matchup coming 4 months ago, but now it's Austin Eckler or bust on that team right now. So to me, I think you're doing yourself a disservice trying to plan that far ahead. What I like to do is when we get into the double-digit weeks or like weeks 9, 10 in that range, I'll start looking at playoff schedules, and because then it's still before the trade deadline. So in leagues that allow trading, you could kind of make your moves based off of that. It also allows you to start picking up those waiver claims, those streaming options a couple of weeks in advance, because a couple of weeks in advance is a lot easier to plan for than 4 months. Like, think about how long ago it feels like week 1 was.
Yeah.
It's so much changes in the NFL.
Absolutely. 100% agree. Every year too. Every year it's that way. Before we start hitting the quarterbacks, which, man, a lot of those quarterbacks are getting hit or even going down without getting hit, we got to hit a quick note from our friends at Circa. Get ready for the ultimate big game parties at Circa Resort and Casino. Super Sunday is in Las Vegas this year. Watch the big game poolside at Stadium Swim's big game viewing party. Massive screen, booming game sound, and a view of the pyrotechnic and visual effects throughout the game. Snag the best seat in the sun with daybeds, poolside boxes, cabanas, and more. Or touchdown at the world's largest sports book, Circa Sports, for the big game bash. 3 stories of football glory featuring a 78 million pixel screen. Book your seat with a variety of reservation options, including bottle service, open bar, stadium-style food, and more. Don't miss these legendary viewing experiences on February 11th. The big game parties only at Circa Resort and Casino. Reserve today at circalasvegas.com. I'm here with Michael Florio from NFL Network, NFL Fantasy, Roto Ballers, and of course on Sirius XM Fantasy as well. Michael, let's talk quarterbacks. It is a mess this year. We allude to it all the time. Right at the top, though, I get more questions about should I start X or Patrick Mahomes? And solving for X is almost always Brock Purdy, it seems like lately. What's your take on Mahomes and Purdy versus Mahomes?
I am okay playing Brock Purdy over Mahomes because Brock Purdy has been better than Patrick Mahomes. Like,
he has.
My crazy stat of the week is since week 10, Tommy DeVito and Patrick Mahomes had the same amount of fantasy points. It's insane. But Patrick Mahomes is angry right now. Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs and everything. Like, I think they are going to come out this week and take their frustration out on the New England Patriots. And this is how it goes, Jeff. You've played fantasy for well long enough to know that when you sit a star player like Patrick Mahomes, that's when he's going to go off for 303. And in the fantasy playoffs, I could live with myself if I started Patrick Mahomes and lost because of it. I would hate myself if I lost because I sat Patrick Mahomes. So I know you shouldn't set lineups based on that, but I still think he's Patrick Mahomes.
For sure.
Know I've been calling him the biggest quarterback bust this year, and I do think he is. That being said, he still is Patrick Mahomes and still brings a lot of upside. So Purdy, sure, you could go with him, but after that, the realistic options that you have paired with Patrick Mahomes that I would play over him is very, very thin.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I do have Purdy one notch ahead of Mahomes this week. But I mean, it doesn't go, and I have Mahomes, I think, at 6. I go Prescott, Hurts, Lamar, Allen, Purdy, Mahomes, but I'm not, that's where it ends. Like, even Tua is below him. I mean, I hate the matchup against the Jets, first of all. And we don't know if he's going to have Tyreek Hill. We have that uncertainty coming into this week. So yeah, I think that's what it's actually a pretty easy line to draw in the sand this week.
Yeah. And the thing is, I agree with all of those quarterbacks that you have over Mahomes, but realistically, Purdy, I think, is maybe Dak. But if you have Dak and Mahomes, you probably should have traded one earlier in the season.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Realistically, you probably don't have any of those other options.
Exactly. Jared Goff, so good early this season, such an efficient non-interception throwing machine, and now he is a turnstile. Multiple interceptions most weeks lately. How worried are you about him? How worried are you about this matchup on Saturday night against Denver?
I'm worried. And Jared Goff just had a stat correction today that gave him another fumble in last week's game.
Oh, no.
So hopefully that didn't knock anyone out of their playoffs or anything like that. I'm worried. And look, Jared Goff in the past has been pretty easy to figure out. You play him at home, you sit him in outdoor and bad weather conditions, stuff like that. But the matchup, I am afraid of the matchup because of 2 reasons. One, the Broncos secondary has been awesome, and there is a realistic chance that Patrick Surtain could shadow and make life very, very tough on Amon-Ra St. Brown. But also, no quarterback has topped 18 fantasy points against them since week 5. And in that stretch, they've played Patrick Mahomes twice, Josh Allen, CJ Stroud, Jordan Love. Justin Herbert was struggling mightily until he got hurt last week against them. But as good as they are against defending the pass, they really struggle against the run. So my thinking, and it's not like Denver is going to go up multiple scores, I don't believe, against the Lions. So I'm thinking that Dan Campbell is looking at this game like we need to force feed Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery and just run the ball as much as we possibly can. I am worried that this could be one of those games where the Lions win and Jared Goff finishes with like 12 or 13 fantasy points. So I actually have him as a sit this week. That being said, I'm not telling you to sit him for any quarterback you can get off the waiver wire. I understand that you might not be able to get away from him, but if you can, I think you should.
Yeah, Stafford, for instance, is a trendy pickup this week. Stafford or Goff?
I love Matt Stafford this week.
I do too.
Easily him.
Jake Browning or Jared Goff?
I would go with Jake Browning, as crazy as that might sound.
I don't think it's crazy. I have him back-to-back in my rankings this week, and I'm probably going to lower Goff a little bit there. Yeah, I think you're right about that. It's a really tough matchup here. I'm gonna be very circumspect about this one. There. By the way, that Denver Detroit game, that's the first game of the week that features the original starting quarterbacks from their team. The first three games, it's Chargers versus Raiders. You've got Stick versus O'Connell. Then you got Browning versus Nick Mullins. In the first game on Saturday, and then the Pittsburgh Indy game, we got Minshew versus Trubisky. So feast your eyes, folks.
And you know what? All of us sickos are going to be watching every single
Oh, every
pass that
second
they
of it.
all throw.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And I will be starting Jake Browning. And yes, I do view the world through a certain black and orange prism. As a Bengals fan, one of three on the West Coast. I think we're up to 5 now. Actually, I think we've become more popular. Converted my daughter, so that's one of them. Yeah, yeah, I have him like a top 12 quarterback this week. We'll see if Jamar Chase is like hindered going into this game. That would change my ranking. But I think he's going to be all right. All these guys, I didn't throw this on the outline, but Mullins, Stick, any of these guys in a super flex league, if you have to pick up somebody, who are you going to?
So I do, because in the flex league, I lost Justin Herbert. Luckily, I have a bye this week, so I'm okay this week. But Brock Purdy is my QB1 now. It was awesome having him as your QB2. Now, my only bench option was Will Levis. So I picked up Zach Wilson and Easton Stick. And I keep advising other people to do the same. Like,
yes,
you want as many options as you possibly can get. And one thing I think you can try to do and should try to do is try to piece it together. Like, Will Levis gets the Texans this week and in week 17, and they are in the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Zach Wilson gets the Commanders next week, and they have allowed the second most touchdowns in fantasy points. So, like, you could go Levis, Wilson, Levis, or Tommy DeVito gets the Eagles next week, which is a really good matchup. Joe Flacco probably picked up, but he gets a good week 16 matchup as well. So, you're going to have to piece it together. There's no one that you could pick up to replace a Herbert or anyone close to that. But in super flex leagues where quarterback depth is being dramatically tested, you're probably not the only one starting a third string quarterback right now, or at least a fantasy third stringer earlier in the season. So try to get as many options on your team as possible. It allows you, in case they catch fire or something like that. Like, Zach Wilson played his best ball of his career last week. If he can keep that going, maybe you find, like, last year when Jalen Hurts went down, Gardner Minshew won people some fantasy championships in Superflex League.
Absolutely.
So this is what the end of the year looks like, but look, it's going to be rough. It's not going to be nearly as enjoyable as you had your starter, but it is possible.
Who can forget the Billy Volek fantasy playoff run? I mean, it comes from weird places. You never know. And I was starting Tommy DeVito before it was cool in the Flex League because, I actually had to because, I'm in another super Flex League where I just lost. I think I lost Stroud for this week, but I've been carrying Will Levis all along as my third. And, it's just, you have to do it. It is what it is. So and you got to be ready to have that next man up if you can, because you don't want to wait to try to pick them up now if you can avoid it too. That's the other thing. But if you can pick up somebody now, do so. So who is so I you kind of answered the question, who is replacing Herbert for you? If you're in a single quarterback league, who are you looking to go? Who's your candidate to turn to as your pickup? Because you don't have to dig as deep there, but who's your guy you're turning to in a single quarterback league if you have Herbert or Stroud?
I'm guessing Matthew Stafford is picked up in all single quarterback leagues. He would be the smash number one option. But if not, like Jake Browning, I know we talked about him a lot, but 23 plus in 2 straight weeks, highest completion percentage in someone's first 3 starts in NFL history. Like, what he is doing right now is very impressive. So I think he's an option. And then look, it gets a little bit uglier, but Derek Carr, I know his teammates don't even really want him to be their quarterback, but he gets the Giants, which is not a matchup that we run from in fantasy. Then he gets the Rams and the Bucks, and they're each in the top 7 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield is always a favorite of mine because he's not going to set the world on fire, but if you need just like a safe 16 fantasy points, he's always on the waiver wire, it seems.
He's always there for you.
Exactly. So it's not going to be nearly as much fun, again, with like if you have a Justin Herbert, but there are options out there right now because all the big name quarterbacks we know are already rostered. So you're
Sure.
going to have to start someone like this. And that's when you play the matchups.
Absolutely. Before we move on to running backs, quick note from our friends at Odds Are you ready to revolutionize your sports betting approach? Begin with a 2-week free trial at oddsr.com, where cutting edge AI technology sharpens your edge in the betting game. Benefit from our proven 2-year track record, boasting a 60% accuracy rate and an impressive 10% ROI. The Odds Are AI meticulously sifts through extensive data to reveal high value, green value plays, guiding you towards smarter betting decisions. And it's not just about the numbers. The Odds Are app is exceptionally user-friendly, crafted to be your go-to betting advisor right at your fingertips. Jumpstart your journey to betting smarter and more successfully. Simply visit the iOS or Google Play Store, download the Odds Are app, and step into a world of confident betting. Your path to a more strategic betting experience starts with our 2-week free trial. Download today, where smart strategy triumphs over luck. We're here with Michael Florio from NFL Fantasy and the NFL Network. Let's talk running backs. And let's start off with Miami. Tough matchup this week against the Jets. Although, at least Raheem Mostert got home on the Black Friday game. It was mostly all in the second half. It's kind of a theme for him, by the way. How do you feel about the Miami running backs this week, given all their other uncertainty issues? Like starting centers out. We don't know if Tyreek Hill is going to be able to play. How do you feel about these Miami running backs this week?
I don't think they're as much of a smash start as they normally are, but you'd have to have some pretty good options, I think, to get away from them. Raheem Mostert leads the league in touchdowns, and before last week, in the 4 full games that Achane and Mostert had played together, Achane was averaging 31 fantasy points per game, and Mostert was 20. To me, this offense is still too good, and the matchup, I think, plays into their favor because the Jets have really struggled against running backs as of late. I believe they're in the top 3 in rushing yards allowed to running backs since week 9 or 10. And then their secondary, we know how elite they are, and especially if Tyreek Hill is banged up. To me, I think this is a game where if you're Miami, you want to run the ball and control the clock and probably even more dump-offs to their running backs as well, especially if you have to get the ball out quickly with their O-line being as banged up as it is. So I am not shy. I have Raheem Mostert in a lot of leagues. I'm playing him in all of them. I only have Achane in one. I am starting him in there.
All right, fair enough. And I am too. It's a tough call and you know what? Mostert ran well even after they lost their center last week. So it's more the passing game that really got wrecked by that injury. Yeah. I think those 2 injuries, but offensive line injuries are a big theme last week. Atlanta was missing 3 starting offensive linemen. And we mentioned the Lions losing Frank Ragnow. I mean, these injuries, I mean, they hit everywhere, not just at skill position players. And, sometimes we overlook the O-line injuries there because it's always a big deal. DeAndre Swift really kind of been on the struggle bus lately. But then again, the Eagles have had a nasty, nasty schedule. They get Seattle this week. That's not quite as daunting, though it is up in Seattle on Monday night. Is he due for a bounce back? What's your take on him?
Yeah, I have Swift as a start this week. And in fact, I wouldn't even think twice about plugging him in the lineup for everything that you said. The Eagles' recent schedule, the last 2 games, Niners and Cowboys, it can't get much harder than that. And they were down multiple scores for much of that game. Even the game against the Bills, they were down multiple scores early on, so they've constantly been in comeback mode. I am expecting them to have a lead in this game against Seattle, which probably means more running the ball, but especially you can't get a better matchup, I would say. Since week 9, no team has allowed more rushing yards or rushing touchdowns to running backs than Seattle, and since week 10, no team has allowed more receiving yards. So he could get him through the air, he could get him on the ground, and then after this week, Giants and Cardinals to end the season. I said in the middle of the season that I think DeAndre Swift could be a league winner. I'm not shying away from that take at all. I know the last couple of weeks have been rough. I still think he can get hot and potentially win people their leagues these next 3 weeks.
Yeah. And I think it was just a matter of, can you get to the fantasy playoffs with him slumping? That's the tricky part there.
Yeah.
But once you get there, you might be rewarded. So I like him there too. Can I interest you in Tai Chandler if Alexander Madison doesn't play this week? Decent matchup against the Bengals. Was considered a very plus matchup, but the last 2 weeks the Bengals have actually been pretty good against the run. What's your take on Tai Chandler for this week?
I do think he is in play if Alexander Madison sits, and he hasn't practiced yet this week. Like, I have one league where I lost Josh Jacobs, so Tai Chandler is my best option to replace him. And the thing is, when Madison got hurt last week, Chandler played 80% of the snaps from that point on, and he's had 14 or more touches in 3 of his last 4 games. He's more explosive, in my opinion, than Alexander Madison. And as good as Cincinnati has been as of late against the run, the one issue they've kind of struggled with all year is allowing big runs. So it really might only take 1 or 2 long. Like, look, I don't think Tai Chandler is a smash start or anything like that this week, but a volume RB2 or flex, he certainly can get that done.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we saw some reports on this Thursday night game. We saw that Josh Jacobs, you mentioned Josh Jacobs. I wanted to go to him real quick. Tom Pelissero is reporting that, first of all, Keenan Allen won't play in that game. Josh Jacobs is questionable because of that quad, originally considered a knee. And Devontae Adams is actually listed as questionable with an illness. So, you're right. This game has turned from, this could be a ticket to the carnival, to, oh my gosh, this is really ugly. This is descending into Pittsburgh, New England territory.
Yeah. If Devontae sits and say Devontae and Jacob sit, are you comfortable starting any Raiders? Because I don't know if I am.
Maybe Jacoby Myers. It's no. I mean, and I'm not thrilled about starting. I'm not even thrilled about starting Eckler, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think he'll get there on volume. He ran better last week against the Broncos, but as you alluded to earlier, you want that's a better running matchup for him. But he only had 10 carries too, though, so it wasn't like they really overwhelmed him with the volume. Even who knows what's going to happen with the Chargers going forward? They're just a big fat mess.
My hope is that Eckler gets like 15 dump offs tomorrow. Just make that happen, Chargers. Please give us something.
Yeah. Do you find it difficult, given that you do your show on NFL Network? Do you find it difficult being critical of coaching staffs? Obviously, Staley is always a lightning rod. How is it for you, especially? I mean, you're right down there. You're right by SoFi. Is it difficult for you in your position?
Sometimes I feel like maybe I shouldn't do this, but I think if you watch the show, I don't, because I kind of view it as I am not being paid to be friends with the. It's a big perk when you get to meet a coach or a player or something like that, but
Right.
ultimately, I never get personal or anything like that. But if I think you're doing a poor job at your job, it's my job to be critical. I believe,
Sure.
I analyze it, good and bad, and anyone that watches the show could tell you I've been hard on Arthur Smith for years now. I'm
Sure.
a huge Bills fan, and I made a 6-minute video earlier this season saying they need to fire Sean McDermott. So it is something that I'm always a little bit like, maybe I need to walk this fine line, but my line is don't ever make it about anything besides football.
Right. I think that's fair. I think that's a good line to draw there. It's always interesting just knowing what lines you have to walk and what lines you can cross and all that. And and I think you phrased right. Don't make it personal, and you can pretty much do what you want there. So I like seeing that there. Any other like waiver wire running back targets you're interested in this week? We mentioned Chandler. Is there anybody else that like maybe getting more work, or anybody else that has caught your eye? I'll throw one out for you because I didn't put this on the outline, but Chase Brown has been a big part of the Bengals offense the last 2 weeks. We all saw that touchdown catch he had. He looked electric on that. After doing nothing for 12 weeks, they've really started to incorporate him as a change of pace back for the Bengals.
Yeah, I do think he's in play. I think he's a deeper option, like more of a flex play or something like that. And he would be maybe one of those where if you're deciding between a safe floor option and the high upside in Chase Brown, you got to be realistic with yourself and your matchup. And if you think you have a chance, or if you're a big underdog, then maybe you play the Chase Brown. My only concern is we know he's the secondary back there. So if he doesn't get that long run or that touchdown, the floor is very low. So to me, it all depends on your circumstances with him. Some others, look, I'm not excited about Zamir White or Amir Abdullah, but if Josh Jacobs is out, volume might be your best bet there. And then he was probably picked up last week, but this is the time of year, and I was trying to get out in front of this since like week 10. I've been saying like pick up Jerick McKinnon. The Chiefs cut him loose late in the season. Look at what he did last year. It took to week 14 and an Isaiah Pacheco injury for that to happen. But I do think Jerick McKinnon is a very big part of this Chiefs offense moving forward, especially given their pass catching issues. They like to ease his workload early on so that he is healthy and fresh come this time of the year through maybe the Super Bowl for them.
Yep. Tough matchup this week in Foxborough, though. The Pats are actually pretty decent against the run. So that's the caveat I have. But then again, you're not buying him just for the carries between the tackles. You're carrying him for those outside runs and the catches, obviously. So he's more of a PPR guy.
They love throwing near the goal line.
Yes, they do.
Look, one of my biggest pet peeves this year is everyone attacking Jalen Hurts for the tush push and saying like it's a cheap play and stuff. And I'm like, well, stop it. But my biggest thing is, why do we hate that play? But as a fantasy and football watching community, we love when Patrick Mahomes does a forward glorified handoff. Like, it's all the same thing. They're all stat padding, and Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid really love to stat pad those touchdowns from like the 1 yard line.
The one thing we can unite together on is our unified hatred of Arthur Smith, though. So we can get behind that at least. So there you go.
Let's go.
Yes.
I always joke. The one thing I guess you could say maybe is in football is I joke that Falcons losses are brought to you by FedEx.
Nice. I like that. Well played. Love that. Before I move on to wide receivers, let's share a quick note from our friends at Splash. RotoWire is proud to partner with Splash Sports for the 2023 fantasy football season. Splash Sports empowers gaming commissioners to earn by creating contests. Commissioners can set up contests, add their style, and enjoy the evolving Splash Sports platform for customized preferences. From daily to season-long contests, Splash Sports caters to various playing styles, such as DFS, Pick X, and traditional Survivor. And unlike traditional sports books, Splash Sports pits you against friends and family, not the house. Splash goes beyond betting, a space where friends can connect, strategize, and share in the excitement of sports. RotoWire will be running weekly DFS tiers contests on Splash Sports all season. Can you beat the RotoWire experts? Visit rotowire.com/splash to enter today. Also, we are on the Blue Wire Network. We love being there. Here are their ads. All right. Thank you for that, folks. I'm here with Michael Florio from NFL Network and NFL Fantasy. Let's talk wide receivers. And I want to start off with two guys that are slumping a little bit, or at least not slumping, but are coming off bad games. You mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown. He gets a tough matchup against Denver. And then Mike Evans, one catch for 8 yards last week. Now he goes up to Lambeau. Are you worried about either of these two top wideouts?
Mike Evans, not even a little bit. I know he disappointed last week. He almost had one of the touchdown catches of the year. Like, he got both his feet in bounds, but his hand hit the line before the out of bounds line first. If he makes that catch, we're talking about him a little bit differently right now. But that was his first game in single digits since, I believe, week 6. And in 3 of his 4 games before last week, he scored 25 or more. Like, I am not really all that concerned at all with Mike Evans. Amon-Ra, a little bit more because of the matchup, because of how much the Denver Broncos have limited yards through the passing game. And I know he moves around a bit outside, a bit in the slot, and Patrick Surtain mostly plays out wide. But I'm very, very nervous about Surtain just saying, that guy, I want to play him no matter where he lines up. And if he shadows him all day, that will make life tough for Amon-Ra St. Brown. That being said, I have Amon-Ra in a number of leagues. Luckily, most of those teams have a bye, but there's a couple where I don't. I haven't even considered not playing him. You have to just start your studs.
Yeah. I was like, in retrospect, I'm like, why am I asking a question? I've got Amon-Ra. I'm starting him. Yeah. It's Surtain be damned. I'm going to have to start him. Maybe I get lucky, get one touchdown, and I'm not going to get that monster day, but I'm also not going to, find 3 other receivers on my roster that are better.
But I'm sure you're getting, because I'm getting like a big name player right now. People are like, oh, should I sit this guy in favor of like the waiver wire pickup of the week? And I'm like, no, like you still start your studs. Like, nothing.
Speaking of waiver wire pickup of the week, Wandale Robinson, huge game on Monday night. Some pedigree here. He just got hurt last year. It's been unlocked, and New Orleans isn't that scary anymore. And Lattimore has been hurt a lot. I mean, they have it's still a good defense. It's not like, oh, I can't go to New Orleans and not start anybody here either, though. Can I interest you in Wandale Robinson as a starter this week?
In deep leagues only, it would be for me. Look, I am a self-proclaimed Tommy DeVito stan. Just like you, I was on that train way before it was cool and popular, and he had even won an NFL game because I do this Italian skit on Fridays, and my God, he has given me more than I ever could imagine a player could give me for that skit. But that being said, he's a fun story and all that. Rondell Robinson, you look at his game log. Last week was a big game, but it was his first game over 50 yards since mid-October. Like, yeah. There's ups in a deeper league. Yes, I think there's upside there. He's the top target for the Giants as long as Darren Waller doesn't return this week. But ultimately, in like my 12-team leagues, I do not want to start Wandale Robinson ideally.
Wandale Robinson or Noah Brown, assuming Stroud plays.
If Stroud plays, Noah Brown for me. If he sits, I'll go Wandale there.
Okay, fair enough. And I think about Noah Brown's like you said, he's total feast or famine. He's played the last 2 weeks and hasn't had a catch yet, if I recall correctly. I know he got shut out last week. Even Robert Woods was, his negative points. I think it was, granted, the Jets drag everybody down into the muck. That's what they do. But at the same time, it's like, can I trust him? It's not always next man up fantasy wise. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it happens like it did with Brown earlier this year, but not always.
I will. The one thing is the Jets are not only, like you said, do they bring everyone down and are they one of the best secondaries in football? They are the absolute best at limiting the deep ball. I believe it was like through week 8, they had allowed 3 deep passes against them. Like it's an insane success rate they have at stopping that. So, and that is Noah Brown's breadbasket. So last week was the worst possible matchup that you could give Noah Brown. I do think there's still a lot of upside there, but only if CJ Stroud plays, because no way am I tying my playoff chances to Davis Mills.
Right. I hear you on that one there. And it's, it's, and sometimes we're just scrambling to find the guys to plug in here a little bit. Speaking of which, if Keenan Allen's not playing, fortunately, the league where I have him in the playoffs, I'm on bye like you are this week in Flex. But if you have to play this week, can I interest you in Quenton Johnson?
No, at least not for me. I loved Quenton Johnson coming into this year. I ranked him pretty highly. It was a big swing and a miss. He is starting to look better and play better as of late, and he could have so many more fantasy points if his hands just worked properly and he was able to come in with the football a little bit more. But he was struggling to consistently top double-digit fantasy points with Justin Herbert. Easton Stick, we have no idea what he is going to look like. Last week was his first time ever getting any real NFL snaps. So even Josh Palmer returning, it's Austin Eckler or bust for me. I'd have to be pretty desperate. Like in a league where I lost Josh Jacobs and everything. I need a flex. So I was looking at my bench and I was like, okay, I have like Terry McLaurin, Isaiah Likely is my backup tight end there. I'm like, yeah, I would play both of those options because I have Johnston and Palmer on that team. And I'm like, I'm not playing them over those guys.
Yeah. If Christian Watson sits, which of the Green Bay wide receivers are you interested in? Because it looks like Wicks is also going to be out. Are you interested in Dubs? Obviously, Jaden Reed is going to be a starter. But is Dubs startable? Is there anybody else in that Green Bay receiving core that you're interested in?
I do think he is startable this week. Jaden Reed is the one that I'm very excited about. And like you said, he is a starter. I have him as a start as well this week. Dobbs, a little bit deeper, because the thing is, you're relying on Jordan Love to get him the ball downfield. It's also what makes Christian Watson so boom or bust is down the further your target gets, the less likely you are to complete it. And Jaden Reed had the Julian Edelman line the other day. 10 targets, 8 catches. I think it was 27 yards, something like that.
Right.
But he's going to rack up the catches because of their so high percentage throws that he's getting. So Dobbs, I think, is in play, but he's a little bit more boom or bust because if he doesn't get you that touchdown, you might be looking at single digits.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right about that one there. It's just, it's just any port in a storm sometimes. Like, come on, let's go. Let's do this here. Another good matchup for pass catchers lately has been going up against Jacksonville. Are you interested in OBJ this week?
Yes, I think that Odell is the top streaming option. And I know he might already be rostered in some of your leagues, but
Right.
very unlikely that he has been a weekly consistent starter for a lot of people. But he's been averaging 13.5 fantasy points per game in his last, I think it is 5 games, maybe 4 games. Don't quote me on the number of games, but the last month plus. The over
Okay.
13 fantasy points per game, that's useful, and he's gotten double digits almost in all of those games. Last week obviously was the biggest one of them all, but he's in a good offense with a MVP caliber quarterback throwing him the ball in what could be a high scoring matchup, as both of those teams are kind of vying for the 1 seed right now. So yeah, I think Odell, Zay Flowers, Isaiah Likely, all options that you could start this week.
All right, very good. I'm all over Flowers and OBJ too, for sure. And Likely. I think Likely is a great matchup too. I mean, if you give up over 300 yards to Joe Flacco and Jake Browning in back-to-back weeks, I mean, you have to be considered a streaming target. That is for sure. I got a number of questions in the queue. You ready to hit some?
Let's do it.
All right, let's start off with Jeff Rogers asks, speaking of Zay Flowers, DK Metcalf or Zay Flowers. DK gets a pretty decent matchup at home against Philly as well.
I'm going with DK Metcalf there. The Eagles have allowed the most production to wide receivers this year, the most fantasy points per game, and very good chance that Seattle needs to put up points and could be trailing, so they'll throw the ball even more than usual, I think.
Yep, agreed. As much as this is one of those don't overthink it situations as far as I'm concerned. It's just like you're starting DK. I mean,
I said to sit DK a couple of weeks ago when he played the Cowboys, and
no
call has ever blown up in my face more.
Oh, we've all made them though. If you've been in this business long enough, you've made plenty that have blown up in our face. And trust me, we get reminded about them all the time.
Oh yeah.
Chad says, with Hunt dealing with the groin injury, Ford dealing with the hand/wrist injury, what happens with Pierre Strong Jr.? Do you rank him? And if so, how? And if so, how high? Easy for me to say.
Both of those players would need to sit for me to be interested in Strong, and even then, he's not all that high for me.
Yeah, and honestly, the Bears, you would think, oh yeah, start them against us. Bears, even before the Montez Sweat deal, were pretty decent against the run. Now they're actually like a legitimate real defense. I mean, the NFL,
Yeah.
I mean, things change quickly. Life happens fast, and if you don't pay attention, it'll go by you. And that the Bears and the Giants both are not the like sitting duck targets that we think they are.
And if you were trying to plan for the playoffs 16 weeks ago or whatever it was, you would have been drafting players facing the Bears and Giants.
There you go. Perfect example. We'll finish with this one here. A tight end question. We didn't hit too many tight end talks earlier there. So Sam Laporta or Trey McBride. I mean, chances are you have that as options because McBride was on the waiver wire most of the early part of the season.
These two and Dalton Kincaid have been like my go-to tight ends this year. I was very high on at least not McBride, but the other two coming into the draft, and McBride in season. I've loved him. I had them all on a number of teams. McBride has a harder matchup going up against the 49ers. I still think you start both of them, but if you have to choose, I'm going to go with my guy, Samuel.
Yep. I lied. I'm actually going to give you one more question here before we get on the way out here. Powerlifter USA says, I have Howell, Carr, and Browning going into the playoffs. You know, that happens when you lose guys. Which one would you drop? You have to drop one of these. Howell gets the Rams this week. I haven't looked ahead too much at the Commanders schedule. I know the Browning. I know the Bengals schedule. They get the Vikings this week, which isn't great. They get the Steelers in Heinz Field. I'm still calling it Heinz Field, by the way. I don't care what their current sponsor is. And then they get the Chiefs. So they got 3 pretty tough matchups here for Browning. And then Carr this week against the Giants. Who's the odd man out?
So Hal gets the Jets next week and then the Niners to end.
Ooh.
Which is, I don't think after this week you want to be using Sam Howell. But the issue is, of those options, Sam Howell is probably the one that I want to start this week in what I think could be a very high-scoring game against the Rams. So I'm going to hold Howell for this week. I think you want Browning for the next 2. While Derek Carr has the best schedule by far of the 3, I think he's probably the odd man out.
I think you're probably right about that one. It's really tough because you're right. It's not just this week. And I guess if your rosters are frozen after this week, it's a tough call to make. But otherwise, you're just streaming on those guys. Otherwise, there. Michael, where can everybody catch your stuff? Like, what time is your show on NFL Network? And any of your other work?
3 p.m. Pacific, so 6 p.m. Eastern. Figure it out if you're somewhere in the middle there. Is Fantasy Live on the NFL Network Mondays through Fridays. You catch me on Wednesdays and Fridays. Friday especially you should watch. We have a lot of fun on that show. Stardom Situm over there, the Fantasy Football Show, the Stardom Situm Show, pretty much any fantasy content that you get over at NFL Media. And then I do a lot for RotoBaller as well. I write a streaming and pivot starts article every week for them. I have my own podcast there with them called Florio's Football Show, where every Tuesday I go over waiver wires, streamers, starts, sits, all of that for the week. And then I also have a show with them Saturdays on Sirius XM. It is 2 p.m. Pacific, so 5 p.m. Eastern time. Me, Scott the King Engel, Anthony Aniano. You're always going to get 2 of the 3 of us each week. We rotate it, but it's a very fun show. So please check that out. Check out RotoBaller, NFL, all of that. And Jeff, thank you and thank RotoWire for having me again. I don't do many in-season podcasts, but I always make sure to say yes to this show because it is always a good time and one of my favorites to go on.
Well, I thank you for coming on. And hey, I mean, who better to go to than the guy that's won the league? You know, one of those against me head-to-head in the finals. But good luck in your defense. Be the three-peat here, perhaps.
Thank you. They've been gunning for me all year, and I understand why. If someone was going for a three-peat, I would be gunning for them as well. But the odds are stacked against me right now with no Herbert, but let's see how that goes.
All right, very good. Thanks everybody for tuning in today. If you're streaming live, we appreciate your questions. If you're listening wherever you get your podcast, appreciate that too. You can check out my rankings at RotoWire, rotowire.com/pod. Gets you your free peek behind the paywall for a couple of days. So please check that out. Thanks for listening. We got Mario and John tomorrow on the podcast. Take care.